Hello, chess friends, and welcome to Yazarov Chess Channel, and welcome to the day 2 of the Skilling Open in 2020. If you have followed the day 1, you know that Magnus Carlsen lost his first game against Jan Nepomniachtchi because of a mouse slip. Mouse slips are part of the game when you play online chess. It's simple as that. Magnus didn't ask for any excuses because of that. He simply continued to push, and he got almost a perfect score out of the 4 next games because he had 3.5 points out of possible 4. Really incredible, again, poor performance by Magnus Carlsen. We have to also say that Magnus' mouse slip costed him the whole game because he had a completely winning position, I think. So as I said, he didn't ask for any excuses, simply played his game and shared after they won the first place with Anish Giri. So Anish Giri also played a great tournament. He plays very attractive with great tactics, with great attacking formations. I really like his style in this tournament. And today in day 2, I decided to show you another great gameplay by Magnus against Jan-Krzysztof Duda. Still one game has to be played. 9 rounds have been played, and after 9 rounds, Magnus Carlsen shares again the first plate with Anish Giri. But we'll see now one game from the day 2 between Carlsen and Duda, because if you have followed this year too, you know that Duda stopped Magnus Carlsen non-losing streak, because Magnus didn't lose in classical time format games for 125 games. Then Duda stopped him, and then in the next game Magnus Carlsen got his revenge. He outplayed Duda, but today they're meeting again in another tournament, and I think this is a very instructive chess game, which shows, I think, the positional skills that Magnus Carlsen, of course, has. He's really one of the best tacticians, but also really one of the best positional players. I think it's a very instructive and a cool game here by the world champion. So here d4 played by Magnus, d5 by Duda. We have c4, after c6 the Slav defense, knight to f3, knight to f6. We have e3, going into accelerated little bit development line, because most of the times you see that white is continuing with knight to c3, but then there are maybe this Czech Slav variations with d takes c4, which are very annoying sometimes to play from white's perspective. e3, we have e6, and now bishop to d3. What the main goal for black is in the semi-Slav, we're waiting the move bishop to d3, and then we can maybe get some tempos after d takes c4, maybe here something like bishop takes c4, then we can play b5. Okay, we have lost a little bit the battle in the center, because we don't have anymore the pawn in the center. White has, I think, a slightly advantage in the center, because white has a 2 versus 1 situation. But it's still playable, as we at least get some kind of a counterplay with the move b5. But what Magnus does here, I really love his opening prep. After the move bishop to d3, here Duda played knight from b to d7. One of the main moves, I think, in these types of setups can be the move knight to c3, but you see, after potential d takes c4, bishop to c4, and b5, the knight can be also then vulnerable to black's attacks. So black could maybe in some occasions, not always, but black could gain a tempo against the bishop on c4, but then could also push the pawn here further on b4 and get another tempo against the knight on c3. So that's why Magnus delays the situation a little bit with this knight. He doesn't want to play the knight on c3. He wants to develop it maybe here to d2. Still black can play maybe d takes c4, but now we can recapture it and still get a compact position in the center with some pawns. So here the b6, black is trying to get the flexibility, wants to develop, of course, the light square bishop here on b7, then to crack the position with the move c5. Magnus castles, now bishop to b7. If, for instance, instead of this b6, you play bishop to b4, it doesn't bring you so much. We still can cover. And if you try, for instance, something like knight to e4, we can still castle, and the attack by black is splashed. Maybe you can f5, but bishop to b2 can be played, knight to c3. You see, it doesn't bring so much. Again, you have to retreat. I don't think that this bishop to b4 idea, although you have weakened a little bit your pawn structure here in front of the king, there are several Dalscore problems. This bishop to b4 doesn't work. So that's why b6, a flexible move here by Duda. We have castling, bishop to b7, bishop to b2, bishop to d6, and now Magnus plays knight to d2. Castling, queen to e2. Magnus has finished his development. We all know, of course, if you don't know, then I'm telling you, the three stages of the opening. First, we should develop our minor pieces, then secure the king by castling, and then removing the queen from the first rank and connecting the rook. So Magnus has finished these three stages of the development, has a healthy setup so far. It's a positional game so far. No tactical shots are possible. It's really a positional battle in the center. Many pawn moves can happen, many dynamic positions can happen, many trades of pieces, many trades of pawns can happen. So far a very complex opening line. So queen to e7, Magnus plays knight to e5, because in the static center setups, that's the setup when you have in the center, for instance, this d4 d5 setup. It's not so good maybe to push the pawns immediately to create some kind of a pawn breakthrough motif, because what we want to do is create outposts. From white's perspective, the outpost on e5, from black's perspective, the outpost on e4. But the e4 outpost is not possible because the bishop is not connected to the e4 square. So it is white is a little bit faster here with the move knight to e5. We have rook from a to d8, rook from a to d1, and now c5. As I said, one of the main ideas could be also a very nice outpost on e4, so that's why c5, breaking also the pawn chain here in the center, and also liberating this diagonal for the bishop, and have a control of the e4 square. So f4, Magnus simply supports his outposted piece, which is very important. In the game, c takes d4 was played. If you try, for instance, let's see now, knight to e4, if you try to cement your knight also on a very active square, then you get knight takes d7, rook takes d7, we can take, c takes d5, e takes d5, and now knight takes e4. Here after d takes e4, bishop to c4, I think in this position white is much better, because our bishop's activity is much better. If you take, for instance, c takes d4, here bishop to d4 can happen. We have both of these bishops on centralized squares. We're controlling the center of the board. This pawn on e4 could be also long-term weakness because it's isolated. It can be maybe supported with the move f5. But still, if you play the move f5, then you're of course liberating also the diagonal for the light square bishop. So I think in this particular case, white is much better. There is also a tricky line I've analyzed. If you, for instance, try bishop to c5, if you try to challenge, then you get a nice tactical shot here. For instance, bishop to f6, deflecting the queen from the defense of the rook. And if you take with the pawn, for instance, then you get queen to g4 and you lose the rook. So this would be, I think, a very tricky idea that Magnus would probably see if the line would have gone to this particular moment. But as I said, here after f4, you see knight to e4 doesn't bring black so much, so that's why I think here white has the advantage in space. Here c takes d4 was played, e takes d4, and now g6. Knight to e4 doesn't work anyway anymore, because we have now a triple protection here of the square e4, so outposts for black are not possible. If you try bishop takes e5, of course, knight takes e5 is not possible. Get f takes e5, you lose one of these pieces. So if you try, for instance, something like bishop takes e5, here I think after f takes e5, you have troubles with the knight. You have to maybe remove it to e8, but then you see we have also some tactical shots around the square h7. Rook to f3, rook to h3 would be very dangerous, including this knight into the game, maybe with the knight to f3, maybe even maneuver the bishop to c1. So we would have, I think, a perfect harmony. So the problem, as I said, in this particular position for black is immediately that black cannot remove this knight from the center, and black cannot also play his knight on the centralized square. So slightly better here for white, of course, the position. Here g6 played by Duda, we have a4, and this was the first inaccuracy that my Stockfish engine evaluates here Magnus Carlsen's moves. It's of course playable because you see now the idea. It's really a cool idea by Magnus Carlsen, the move a4. It may seem strange to you, but it is a very nice positional idea, because what we want to do is to fix the knight, one of these knights, on this very active square c4, and then when we fix maybe this knight or this knight from d2 on c4, then it cannot be kicked away with the potential b5 move. So that's a very important positional move, although the engine shows that it is an inaccuracy, and it's really there are basically two inaccuracies that Magnus Carlsen played, which is really incredible when you think about it. Magnus didn't play any mistakes or blunders. He played stockfish, two stockfish and inaccuracies, which are of course not something that humans shouldn't even evaluate. So as I said, a4 for me it was still a great move, because you see now the positional idea by Magnus. After knight to h5 we have c takes d5, bishop to d5, and now knight to c4. Both of these knights are very well placed. They're controlling the center of the board. We have this reloading idea. If something takes, then we can play another knight here on the board. So it's really a nice idea. So here after for instance, if you instead of this c takes after c takes d5, e takes d5, and maybe if you try here to play f6 to kick away the knight, here let's go back, pardon me, after c takes d5 here, pardon me, I messed this up. Let's go back here. After knight to h5, c takes d5 can play. If you try e takes d5, that's the line that I wanted to explain. If you try e takes d5, then you risk always this move f5. This breaks the position in the center immediately, and f6 is not possible because we have again a nice tactical shot. F takes g6. We have if you take, for instance, then we can take queen takes h5. So it's a bad game here for black. So you see, you cannot really kick away. That's the line that I wanted to see. What's the issue about this knight if you try it, for instance, to kick it away? So in the game, Magnus tries c takes d5. We have bishop to d5. As I said, e takes d5 is not possible. Here, knight to c4. You see how Magnus gets both of these knights on the best squares on the board. Knight to f6, and Magnus simply takes. Knight takes d6, queen to d6, and now knight to c4, attacking the queen again. Knight takes f4 doesn't work, a counter attack on the queen, because we will simply take. Knight takes d6, knight takes e2, bishop to e2, but now if you take, your knight is hanging on f6. So again, not possible here for black to counterplay around the square f4. So in the game, queen to b8 was played. Magnus goes queen to e5. We have queen to a8, and now rook to d2. Bishop takes e4, bishop to e4, bishop takes e4, queen to e4, and here Duda hoped for a simplification line, but it's really bad, because we have now again a nice motif here. Bishop to a3. Here rook to d5 was played by Duda, simply counter-attacking. But even if you try rook to e8 to escape, then you get knight to d6, and the fork on the queen and the rook, you're forced basically to take. And here after queen takes e5, if we say f takes e5, the knight has to move, then we can take out the rook anyway. So it's a bad game. So after the move here, queen to e4, Magnus played bishop to a3. As I said, we have rook to d5, but now queen takes e4, knight to e4, and now queen to rook to e2, attacking the knight. The knight is trapped here. The rook is hanging in the game. Rook takes d4 was played, but Magnus takes the rook and has now, of course, won the exchange. After king to f8, rook to e3, we have knight to f6, and now knight to e5, cementing the knight again on a very active square. Knight to d5, and now rook to d3. Forces basically further trades of pieces. First and forces really a simplification line in the game. Rook to d3 was played, knight to d3, and now knight to d2, attacking the rook. But now rook to c1. Here knight to b3. Okay, Duda has grabbed some pawns, but now Magnus can activate his rook on a very active square. We have king to g7, and now the rook comes very active into the game. Is trying to attack, of course, all of these weaknesses on the 7th rank, on the 6th rank. It's really a bad continuation here for black. Although maybe if this would be blitz or bullet, this could be maybe playable for black to find some kind of a complication, but still with many minutes on the clock, Magnus pulled this through, because here after a5 protecting his pawn, Magnus has now a very active move, rook to a7, and we're targeting now the move rook to f7 somehow, with the preparation, of course, knight to e5, and we can take out this pawn. So in the game, rook to f8 was played, and now comes the second inaccuracy that the stockfish is showing. It's not a problem about this move. I still like this move. What the point about this move is we should probably play something like knight to e5, because knight to f4 doesn't work, rook to f7, and you lose the knight. But still, this is a clear idea by Magnus. G3, protecting first its pawn, and still you can play knight to e5. It's still a bad game because the problem is you cannot push f6. You lose then the h7 pawn. So as I said, it's simply a different mover, and that are basically the two slightly inaccuracies that Magnus Carlsen played in this game. Really, again, a stockfish performance by the world champion here. Knight to d4, knight to e5. Again, you see Magnus plays the same line, but now after f6, we have knight to d7 attacking the king, and now rook to b7. We can now take this pawn. It's not the point about that. There are simply too many weaknesses in white's position. h6, knight takes b6, knight to c3. Magnus goes here rook to a7, again attacking the weak pawn on a5. We have knight to b3, and now king to g2. The king has to play in an endgame. g5, f takes g5, f takes g5, and now rook to h7. You see, this is perfectly fine. The knight is protecting this. We can take out this pawn. We can go also after this pawn. Then the king is out of game. That's the cool thing about Magnus Carlsen's setup. This rook is of course controlling the 7th rank. In the game, rook takes h6. We have king to f7, rook to c6 attacking the knight, knight to d1, knight to c4 attacking again two weaknesses: the weak pawn on e5, the weak pawn on a5 here. In the game, Duda tried e4 here, knight to d6 attacking king to e6, and now Magnus takes another pawn. In the game, here king to d5 was played, and now rook to d6 wins the game, because in this position Duda resigned. If you take, for instance, then we simply take, and we can create here a pass pawn with h4. The king is deflected. We can then attack the knight, go after this pawn, and again it's game over here for black. Great game by Magnus. It wasn't maybe the most attractive of games, but I think many times these positions are happening to us. I played similar positions many times in my life. I think it was a very instructive game with this idea, with this early knight outpost, controlling then your e4 square weakness in the position, getting use of really this other knight, getting the knight on c4. Although, as I said, this move a4 was evaluated by the stockfish engine as a mistake, still I like this move. You see this idea, let's go back, by Magnus Carlsen to fix this knight on c4. I think it was a really nice positional idea here. Let's go back. So here a4, that was the only inaccuracy that Stockfish evaluated, and then afterwards this move g3. Really, again, a nice Stockfish performance by Magnus Carlsen. Knight to h5 we see, and then this knight comes into the game. We're controlling the central board. Really great here. Great attack by the world champion again. So, okay, as I'm recording this video, the round 10 is played probably now. Magnus Carlsen is playing with the black pieces against Sergey Karjakin. We'll see how this match will end. Anish Giri and Magnus Carlsen, who are the leaders of the tournament, have played so far. They played a draw. Giri got the draw with the black pieces against Magnus. Good result for Anish Giri. I wish him all of the best also in the continuation of the tournament. We'll see now who will make it to the top 8, and of course then afterwards we'll have this knockout stage between the top 8 of this event. So, okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. I really enjoyed it a lot. Great positional game by the world champion. If you want to see more games from this tournament, check out my Skilling Open chess playlist, which I've created. Here's the link. And if you want to see maybe the best chess games of all times, check out my best chess games of all time series. And you can also check out my commented chess games played by computers, in which I'm analyzing the top games played by Stockfish and NUE, Lila C0, and some other cool engines. And if you like this content, you can also subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.